This is Sarah.
And this is Christina.
From the RALE layout project in the RALE SIG. And this past week, a lot of our work was focused on talking with Josh and Hao-Chi and brainstorming new ideas and directions for our research project. So the big research question that we've decided to focus on has to do with whether or not learners can access desired learning experiences from professional examples that existing tutorials and more deliberately scaffolded learning solutions can't provide.
Yeah, so currently we are using our previous need finding that we talked about in our last sprint video about learning gaps and prerequisite gaps, and we're going to apply that within helping learners learn from in-context, real-world applications.
So in particular, we're focusing on the quote-unquote novice plus user class, specifically users with at least a year of basic web programming experience, familiar with using HTML and CSS to create a web page, and also with vanilla JavaScript programming. The specific user stories we're designing for this particular class are: as a user, it's hard for me to see how other sites use design techniques I'm curious about, where we define design techniques broadly as implementation decisions, whether we're using, how we're using ClearFix, how we're implementing CSS ClearFix, how I would implement a responsive grid system, etc. As well as a user, I want to defend my decision to write a website in a certain way or implement a particular design technique.
And then as a user, it's hard to visualize techniques that I've had trouble with. So in particular, this is where the professional examples and in-context examples will be useful for the learner. And then also, as a user, it's hard to interpret and inspect professional sites quickly to see what coding design decisions they've made. So in particular, what the user flow that we're currently thinking about is that the user is stuck. They don't know what to do, and they don't know enough to map back to their knowledge gaps. So, but they know specific things that they want to build and want to include in their own projects, such as the specific coding techniques that we mentioned before.
And so the main difference between our project and the other RALE projects is that whereas a lot of the other RALE projects are based on deliberate search engines or galleries for examples, our model for the solution is a little more opportunistic in that users would be able to specify coding techniques to keep an eye out for in some kind of list in their browser, and then as they browse particular websites of interest, or even just casually, they'll be able to see on the fly highlighted examples and notifications when their techniques and tools of interest are being featured in the website that they're currently on.
And so for the rest of the sprint, we worked a little bit on tech feasibility just to see what we could find, specifically with the ClearFix examples. And then we also storyboarded some a couple of ways that we think the user flow could work.
So here's one example of a user flow. In this particular example, it uses the quote-unquote goggles model of interaction, where a user would be able to toggle a button to see other annotations and code snippets that other users had left on a particular page for some feature, component, other implementation technique that was used on that page. And then in this particular example, this user flow would describe a user who is interested in making a particular feature, so in this case a responsive grid, during their project, and is able to turn on the quote-unquote goggles feature to specify interest in a responsive grid layout, then return to the professional example of interest and see how their particular implementation is done.
In this example, the user has a specific technique that they're looking to find. In this case, they specify what the technique that they're looking for is, and they put it in, and then they just go browsing like they normally do. And so when this user ends up on Amazon, the feature that they're looking for is actually part of Amazon's page also. So now they can see exactly how it is worked within their context.
And this is an example of more casual browsing and sort of opportunistically finding examples of a feature in question, as opposed to doing like a targeted search or browsing to particular websites to see how specific examples that the user already has in mind are implemented. So that was the main focus of our sprint this past week. We also worked a lot on getting our URG proposal ready to submit this coming week. And next week we'll be focusing on a lot of tech feasibility and lo-fi prototyping for the various interface ideas.
See you next week. Or in 2 weeks. Oh no, how do I end this?
Stop screen recording.